Hi everyone, Jessica here and welcome back to my channel. So for today's video, I wanted to take a look at the new issue of Creative Stamping magazine. This is issue 84 and this is the Best of British. So this is the first issue of this magazine I've received, as I've just taken out a new subscription to it. So we've got included an A6 Union flag background stencil and 33-piece stamp set. Now, I believe all of these free gifts that come in this magazine are A4 in size, which I think is really great value for money and means you'll build your stash up really quickly. So let's take a flick through the magazine itself. So as you can see, it's got reference to the Simply Cards and Papercraft magazine, and I'll pop a link up in the corner to my last video in regards to that particular magazine issue. And as you can see, there's lots of different sort of tips and tutorials in this magazine for this actual stamp set that comes free with it. This I think is really good because it gives you lots of different ideas of what you can actually do with these stamps, not just giving you a couple of pages. So here you can see you've got technique pages, so this is creating a collage and creating masks for your stamps. What I think is great is you've got pictures for different cards that you can make with shopping lists and full instructions on how to create those cards. And I think that's really important, especially for beginners. So let's jump straight into our first card today. So as you can see here, I've cut out 4 5 by 5 centimeter squares, and I'm just going to stamp an image onto each square. So this stamp set has got some really iconic British images. So you've got things like the taxi, the red telephone box, you've got a bus in there, there's a Union Jack, and there's also a few wartime images. So you've got things like the aeroplane, you've got the medals, and I think these are really fantastic, especially for masculine cards. I personally struggle to make masculine cards, but I think this stamp set would be absolutely perfect for that. But you can kind of put a twist on it and make it a little bit more feminine. There are also some really fabulous sentiments in here as well. So you've got proud to be, best of, British, king for a day, queen for a day. I think those would be perfect for wedding cards. You've got hello, call me, chuffed to bits for you, and that's just a few. So you've got some really, really good sentiments that you'll be able to use on lots of different cards. So what I'm doing for this first card is I've stamped my taxi image onto my little square, and I'm just going to dip it into some clear embossing powder and just emboss the image. This will just make all those details on this stamp stand out after I've coloured it. I'm going to be using my alcohol markers to colour these in, and I don't want that detail of sort of the shading that's already on the image to be lost behind the colour. So I'm just setting my embossing powder with my heat tool, and this then will create almost like a barrier where the embossing powder has gone hard, and this will then stop any sort of colours running through, and like I said, it just keeps that bit of detail in the image. So here are my 4 images that I've stamped and heat embossed, and we can go ahead and colour them in using some alcohol markers. So the alcohol markers that I'm going to be using today are the Nuvo alcohol markers. These are new to me, and I'll be creating a video very soon just sort of reviewing these particular pens, sort of showing you how to colour with them. I'll also be using some of my Spectrum Noir Tri-Blend pens as well, just because I wanted to get a different tone of red. So for the first set of colours for the double-decker bus, I'll be using Plum Tomato, Tiger Lily and Pink Grapefruit. So as you can see, you've got the colours and the names on the side of the pens, and then you've got their corresponding number on the cap. So the next set of pens is going to be for the taxi, and we're using Black Smoke, Dark Slate and Turtle Dove. Like I said before, I wanted to get a different shade of red between the bus and the phone box, so that's why I'm bringing in my Spectrum Noir Tri-Blend marker. This will just give me a different sort of shade of red. So I'm just going to go ahead and colour these images in. Now, I'm not doing anything particularly special when colouring these images. I'm using the extra details that are on the stamp, so those lines, to give it those shadows. So I'm really letting the stamps do most of the work, and I'm just kind of colouring in around it. So using these 2 different kinds of alcohol markers, I have noticed a bit of a difference. So with my Tri-Blend pens, I tend to put down a layer of the lightest colour first and then work to the dark and then come back to the lightest colour. But with these Nuvo pens, what I've done is started with the dark, so I've put my shadows in first and then worked to the light. So you can colour in whichever way is easiest for you. I'm getting used to these Nuvo pens, so really it's going to be a bit of a learning curve for myself. I do think these Nuvo pens are really good. Some of the colour combinations I'm not sure that I can get to work perfectly, but I think that'll just come with practice and time. But you can see that bus has turned orange, so when it's dried it has gone a little bit deeper, but what I thought was going to be red is pretty much orange. Other than that, I am happy with the way my images have come out. So I've just cut some black mats to stick my images onto, just to make them pop off the page a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and stick these down, and then we can bring our card together. Depending on how much time you spend colouring in your images, this could actually be quite a quick card. So because I was trying out my new Nuvo pens, I was taking a little bit longer. But like I said, depending on how you colour your images, or if you leave them in black and white, this could be a really quick card to put together. I thought it looked a little bit boring just with the card blank and then those squares on top. So I've taken a piece of craft card that I just had in my stash, and I'm just going to cut this down slightly just to give it a mat for the background. And I think this really gives the card a little bit more of a pop, and I think it does finish it off nicely. So for the rest of the cards that I make in this video, I have sort of kept the same colour theme. So I've used the black and the craft paper, so the same craft paper here. And I think it just kind of brings all these cards together quite nicely, sort of using that same colour palette. But I really wanted my stamped images to be sort of as colourful as possible, because I think that just brings out the images a little bit more. So I'm just arranging my squares into the higher portion of the card, and I'm just laying them out to make sure that I get them nice and straight before I adhere them down. Now we can go ahead and adhere our panel to our blank card base. So this is a 7 by 5 inch card base. So that really gives you an idea of how big these images actually are. So for 33 stamps, that's on an A4 sheet, some of these images are very big, and I think is a really fabulous value for money stamp set. So to finish this card off, we're just going to add a sentiment. So I've stamped and white heat embossed, proud to be and British. And I've just stamped this onto some black cardstock. So I'm just going to pop them onto a foam pad because I want this sentiment to sort of stand out and give the card a little bit of dimension. So the British has gone at the bottom of our square, and the proud to be is just going to sit in the middle. I really love the way these images have come out. Like I said previously, I wasn't too sure about the bus because it does look really orange, and the taxi, I had a few issues sort of blending the colours really well together. So as you can see, it's got quite a lot of light grey, and then it's got that really heavy dark grey. But again, I think that's just going to take some practice. But overall, I do really love this card. So for the next demonstration, we're going to use the medals, and I've already stamped and actually heat embossed this, but because I used a waterproof ink, it dried really quickly, so it didn't allow a lot of embossing powder to stick to it. So on the sort of heavy black sections, you can see a little bit of embossing powder, but not very much. So what I'm actually going to do is colour this image in with some watercolours. So I've got my palette of just regular rainbow colours, but I'm also going to take this metallic set because I want to paint the actual medal bit in sort of metallics to make it look sort of gold and silver. So I didn't have a bronze, but there's a light pink in there, which almost looks like a bronze colour. So one thing I did notice when painting this gold section was that the paint was actually sat on top of the black ink. So it wasn't allowing the full design to kind of show through, because this particular stamp is really, really detailed. And I think that's what makes it such a nice image. So I tried to take some of the colour off it, but it didn't seem to make much difference. And I wonder if that's because I tried to use a combination of watercolour ink and heat embossing. So I guess it's kind of counterproductive to use both, because I could paint with these watercolours and use the watercolour proof ink so that the colour doesn't run. However, because it dries very quickly, it didn't allow the embossing powder to stick to it because it was already drying. So I wonder if I use a normal ink and heat emboss it, it will create almost like a resist technique. That way the colour will sit in between the black ink rather than on top of it. So next time I'll use one or the other, not try and use a combination of both. So I'm just finishing up with the metallic section of these medals, and I think they come out really nicely. I think it works really well and gives it that more realistic look. So next we can move on to sort of the ribbon section of these medals. So you could do some research and actually find the correct colour combinations to make these medals real. Or if you are given this card to somebody who has received the medal in the past, you can again copy the design of that. I've just kind of made up the colours here from what I think would look nice together, but like I said, you can make them as realistic as you want. I wanted to try colouring these in with the watercolour paints. This is again something new that I'm trying, and I just want to see how different the effects can be between doing something like this and just doing your standard alcohol inks. So I do quite enjoy watercolour colouring in, but I'm not particularly good at it. So doing things like this just helps me kind of practice a little bit. And again, I think the colours sort of came out really nicely. They're really nice and vibrant, and it is quite easy to do. I had to be careful when painting in this middle medal section because the lines of colours are really close together, and again because it didn't emboss very well, you don't want your colours to kind of run together, so it's just something to watch out for. I do really love this stamp set. When I first sort of got it out of the packaging, I wasn't sure really where to sort of go and what kind of cards to create, because this isn't sort of the typical images that I would use, but that's what I think is really fantastic about getting these magazine subscriptions, because you can build your craft stash with lots of different kinds of images, and all of a sudden you've got a big collection where you can make lots of different cards for lots of different kinds of people. So I think this is a really good value addition to your craft stash. Like I said, the sentiments in there are really good, and again you've got images that you can use for lots of different occasions. So we're just coming to the last little section of painting in these medals, and then what I'm going to do is just use my heat gun just to dry it off a little bit, because obviously I want to put my card together pretty much straight away. If you're wondering how I cut these images out, so there are no coordinating dies as far as I'm aware, but I just popped this image through my scanning cut machine and did a direct cut with a small 1mm seam allowance, and it cut these images out perfectly. So I'm just taking that craft card again to put down as my mat, and we're going to keep this card really simple. So what I like about all three of the cards that I create in this video, that they are quite simple, but I think they all look really effective, and I'm not sure that they need anything else to kind of jazz them up. I think they look really great as they are. So all I'm doing is just going to pop down our medals, and this is going to go slightly to the right hand side. I was going to make it look like almost like a pocket. I did see an image of a card in the magazine that had done that, but I wanted to then take my sentiment and have it as sort of a longer strip. So I've taken the sentiment My Hero, and again I've white heat embossed this onto some black cardstock, and I'm going to pop this onto some foam pads just to raise it up off the card and give it a little bit of dimension, and I'm going to use that to kind of anchor it onto the card. So there's a small sort of section right at the top of the medal that I've painted in gold as well, which I can only imagine would be some sort of clip to actually attach it to someone's uniform. So I'm just going to make sure that you can still see that small section, but I'm just going to use the band that we've made, like I said, just to kind of ground the medals onto the card. So instead of making it look like a pocket like they've done in the magazine, we've just taken our sentiment and let the medals sort of dangle from it. So I really love this card. Again, I think it's really simple, but I think it's incredibly effective, and I honestly don't think it needs much more than what we've already done. So this is the last full card that we're going to make. And what we're going to do is take the Union Jack stencil and we're going to take the sort of fighter plane. So again, I've already stamped and coloured this image and I've popped it into my scan and cut machine and cut it with that 1mm seam allowance again, just to get that nice white border around the edge. So what we're going to do with the stencil is we're actually going to pop it through our die cutting machine and we're going to try and emboss it onto our craft card. So I'm just lining up my stencil with my craft paper and I'm just holding it down with some purple tape so it doesn't move about when we put it through the die cutting machine. So you'll need to get the right combination of plates for your particular die cutting machine to allow this to emboss onto the cardstock. So I'll be using my rubber mat and this will help emboss into my craft card. So I've actually run this through a couple of times just to get that to emboss a little bit deeper. It's obviously not going to look like an actual embossing folder where it's not going to be that deep, but it just gives you that really nice impression. I wasn't sure if you'd be able to see it very much on camera, but actually you can see it quite well. So all I'm going to do, just to sort of enhance this a little bit, is I'm going to take a dry blending brush that I use for my brown inks, and I'm just going to use kind of the residual ink that's in the brush just to sort of highlight that image a little bit more. So I've just realigned my stencil and I'm trying to hold it down with my purple tape, but I kind of abandoned that after a while because it wasn't sticking very well. But what I'm going to use is just that residual ink that's left over in my blending brush, and I'm just going to use that to kind of highlight this Union Jack image. And I think it just kind of brings the image a little bit more into focus and allows you to sort of see it once we put our plane on it. So as you can see here, it's just kind of highlighted where it's been embossed. And it's also a perfect size. So this card is just about 6 by 4 inches, and I'm putting it onto a 5 by 7 card because I wanted to have a really nice wide border around the edge. I really love how this background came out. I think embossing that stencil was a really great idea and it creates a really beautifully subtle background, and I think it works really well with this plane. So a card like this would be perfect for somebody who loves planes, possibly a grandparent. So again, you've got so many different occasions and this stamp set really allows you to create cards for so many different people. So all we're going to do is just pop our plane onto some foam pads just to again raise it up off the card and just give it a little bit of dimension. I think the cards that we've created today are quite basic in terms of there's not a lot of embellishments or anything like that on them, but I just think they work so well and I'm so happy that I decided to use this craft card. It's not something that I use very often, but I think it actually works really, really well with the images that we've stamped out today. So I've just popped the plane just into the centre of the card, and again, even as it is, I think it looks brilliant, but we are just going to add a sentiment. So I'm just going to bring in my stamping platform and we're going to use the sentiments "Happy Birthday Old Chap." So like our other sentiments, we're going to heat emboss this, except this time we're going to stamp it in a black ink and we're just going to use the clear embossing powder just to give it that nice little shine and finish this card off nicely. So again, we've just used our anti-static bag and this just stops any embossing powder from sticking to anything else that is invisible on your cardstock. So if you are going to go into heat embossing for your card making or your crafting projects, I would highly recommend getting an anti-static tool. So now we're just going to use the clear embossing powder and then we can heat set this powder and it'll just finish off our sentiment nicely. So as you can see, I keep my clear embossing powder in this tub. So this is the embossing powder that I do use most. And I just thought it was easier access putting it in a tub like this, because if I had any small images, I could just kind of dunk it into the embossing powder like you've seen me do there. And it just makes everything a little bit easier. So we've got our sentiment, so we're just going to trim it down. So instead of using my big tonic paper trimmer, I'm just going to use this small guillotine. I don't use this very often at all, but it just works better if you've got smaller sentiments. And as you can see there, I've just backed it onto, again, the same craft card. But I thought it kind of got lost in the background a little bit. So I'm just going to take one of my ink pads and I'm just going to sort of dunk the edges into the sort of sponge of the ink pad, and this is just going to create a nice sort of dark border around our sentiment, and this is just going to make it stand out because you've got the same colour sort of on top of each other. It gets a little bit lost, so this will mean that it stands out without having to put another kind of matte layer down. It just gives it that little bit of definition. When you're doing this though, just be careful you don't sort of get it too much on your fingers, because you don't want to ruin your project by having sort of little inky fingerprints all over it. So all that's left to do for this card is just to pop a foam pad again on the back, just to give our card a little bit of dimension, and then it will be finished. Using foam pads, I think, really kind of elevates your cards, and I think it makes them really stand out, especially from the cards that you buy from the shop. It just gives everything a little bit more dimension. It just makes you sort of focus on different sections of the card. It gives a really nice kind of shadow, so behind that plane, because it's lifted off your page, you can see a little shadow underneath there, and I think it just gives it that depth and dimension. So definitely foam pads is something you need to have in your craft stash. So here is our finished card, and again, I think this just looks absolutely brilliant. So this last demonstration is just going to be really quick. I just want to show you another way of using your stencil. So this stencil is A6, so that's roughly 6 by 4 inch. So I'm just going to tape it onto a card blank of that size. So I'm just going to tape the top and the bottom just to keep it in place. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to heat emboss this stencil image. So make sure you've got it nice and secure, because you don't want it to move at all, and you want to keep it flush to the card. So once you're happy that you've got it in place and it's where you want it to be, then you can go ahead and take your embossing ink pad. So this is the clear pad, and I'm just going to kind of try and press it through that stencil. So I'm more using the edge of this ink pad rather than the center, and I'm just sort of concentrating obviously on the areas that you would normally ink through. So just make sure you get a nice good coverage, and what you can do is just take your stencil up slightly just to see if you've got all the areas covered. So what I'm going to do now is just lay down a piece of paper, because this is what I'm going to use to catch my embossing powder. So I'm just going to check to make sure that I've sort of captured every little section of this stencil, and you can only just about see where I've put my embossing ink down. So there was a small section that I didn't quite get, so I'm just going to go back in and just make sure that I pick that up. So again, you can just faintly make out where I have put my ink down. So the embossing powders I'm going to be using, these are stamped by Chloe. So these are the Wow embossing powders, and we've got shaved ice, strawberry soda, and lime zing. So these are relatively new to my stash, and I have honestly been using them loads recently, and I'm hoping to do a couple of videos to show you different ways that you can use these embossing powders. So as you can see, I've only gone to 1/3 of the card, and I've covered it in that shaved ice. And now we're going to go on to the strawberry soda, and we're just going to do this middle section. So the way I'm putting down my embossing powder here is going to create quite a definitive line between the colours. I'm not too worried about that, because I just wanted to show you a different way of using your stencil. So all I'm doing is using this paper to funnel the excess embossing powder back into the tubs. So the next colour we're going to use is the lime zing, and we're just going to cover that last third of the card with this really lovely bright green colour. I've been trying out using these embossing powders to cover bigger areas like I'm doing here, rather than just using it to create outlines. So I've been trying to colour in things like flowers using this embossing powder. So as you can see, we've covered our whole card now with the embossing powder, and it's actually covered really, really well. So all we need to do now is just grab our heat tool, and we can heat set this. So if you do get any sections of embossing powder that's stuck where you don't want it to, you can use just a dry paintbrush, and you can just brush those bits off. So when you're embossing a big area like this, just be patient with it. You will get there eventually and it will sort of come together and be worth the time. Just be careful to sort of have it in a place where you're not going to burn your fingers. I've done that quite often, so just be careful when you're doing this. So like I said, there's another example of how to use your stencil, and we've just embossed that. And I think this looks really, really good. Even though it's got quite harsh lines between the colours, I think it's worked out quite well. So again, just another way of using your stencil and doing something a little bit different. So let's take another look at the other cards we created in this video. So here we've got our embossed background using a stencil along with the plain stamp. Next we have our watercolor painted medals with the My Hero sentiment. Then we've got the 4 classic British icon images in the squares with the sentiment proud to be British. So overall, I really love the way these cards came out. I think that theme and the colour scheme that we've used works really well throughout all 3 of these cards. I think this is a really fantastic stamp set. Like I've said previously, it will work for so many different occasions and for lots of different people with lots of different interests. I really do think this stamp set is going to add a lot of value to my craft stash. I don't have a lot of card making supplies to make masculine cards, but I think this stamp set is going to be perfect and I will probably be reaching for it more often than not. Like I said at the start, this is my first issue from my new subscription of this magazine, and I would really recommend getting a subscription. It means you don't have to worry about missing the latest magazine that comes out. It will be delivered right to your door, and of course there are savings in there with buying a subscription, and usually you do get a free gift when you do subscribe. So that's it for this video. I hope I've given you some more inspiration on how to use this Best of British 33-piece stamp set and of course the A6 Union flag background stencil. So if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and pop a comment below. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any future videos. Thanks very much for watching and happy crafting.